is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories.
Not seeking a new Cold War.
Joe Biden strikes a new tone as he addresses the United Nations General Assembly in his first speech as president.
Our other headlines: France accuses Australia of treason as the row over Canberra's defence agreement with the United States and Britain shows no signs of dying down.
The coal war. Poland says it'll keep mining, but it's being fined $500,000 a day by the EU.
And thousands of people flee as volcanic lava demolishes homes in the Spanish Canary Islands. Joe Biden has warned the world faces a decisive decade as he made his first address as US President to the 76th United Nations General Assembly. Amid growing tension with China, Biden said America is not seeking a new Cold War.
The annual gathering of global leaders is taking place against the backdrop of strained superpower relations, the COVID-19 pandemic and a worsening climate crisis. Well, our correspondent John Terrett is in New York for us. So, John, what did you make of Biden's speech?
Well, I think it was very, very wide-ranging and very, very light on the details. That's what I would say. It lasted just over 30 minutes, from just after 10 o'clock in the morning here until about 10:30 local time. And, of course, it's really President Biden's opinion on all these topics that are facing the world at this moment. And he called the world at an inflection point. He said the world is at an inflection point with particular reference to COVID-19 and all the millions of people who have died around the world because of it. And he was tipping forward to what will be tomorrow's big story, which is a huge COVID-19 and all its many variants summit here at the UN General Assembly, which will be partly in person and partly virtual. And this was called for by the president a couple of weeks ago. It's his little baby, as it were, and he called it a very, very exciting opportunity. And he also used the occasion today to say that they were going to double the amount of money that they give to countries who are struggling around the world with COVID-19, countries that have a sort of, difficult time with their economies, emerging nations, that sort of thing. And that's interesting because they only doubled that fee that they're paying up to those countries in the early part of the year, but around about April of this year. He also announced $10 billion of extra spending for hunger in the world. Now, on the use of force, President Biden said that in future, the use of the U.S. military around the world will be a tool of last resort, and that he favors consulting the American people and the allies and standing very strongly with the allies around the world rather than any kind of conflict resolution of the kind that we've seen in the past that led to Iraq and Afghanistan, for example. He called the NATO alliance sacred, particularly Article 5. I did not hear any reference to the French, who of course are up in arms at the moment over the AUKUS deal and the submarines going to Australia and their contract being cancelled. I didn't hear any reference to France, but what I did hear, and what I thought was the key to the speech, which, as I say, was very, very wide-ranging, was his call for the United States to not wish to have another Cold War. That was the main message to the people in the room. The United States does not wish to engage in another Cold War, and he said we will work with any nation, any way possible, in order to avoid that. Now, we have a soundbite of what he actually said, and here it is.
The United States will compete, and will compete vigorously, and lead with our values and our strength. We'll stand up for our allies and our friends and oppose attempts by stronger countries to dominate weaker ones, whether through changes to territory by force, economic coercion, technical exploitation, or disinformation. But we're not seeking, say it again, we are not seeking a new Cold War or a world divided.
And to that end, regarding the DPRK, North Korea, he said that the United States is seeking full denuclearization of the peninsula. And regarding Iran, and there are talks going on in Vienna at the moment, as you know, and indeed I think President Biden was accused of being rather slow to the party when it comes to those Vienna talks of Iran. He'd said, we are committed to the JCPOA and the return of full compliance if Iran, he said, will do the same. A couple of other quick topics. There's a lot of talk about human rights, a lot of talk about togetherness, about working with allies, working with this place, the United Nations. He did preserve his right to defend the United States, both in cyber attacks and also military attacks. He said the United States is no longer the country it was after 9/11. We've learned an awful lot about how to deal with terrorism, he said. And then just a couple other quick points. On the Middle East, he's committed to the two-state solution between Israel and the Palestinians. He mentioned Ethiopia and Yemen in the context of constant reports of rape being used as a weapon of war. And he called on world leaders to provide dignity, to work for dignity for their people, including, he said, the LGBTQ community. Guys?
So, John, that was the US president, but China's president will address the assembly shortly. What can we expect?
Yes, now this is interesting to me because I thought that he was going to talk on the 25th, which is Saturday. That was certainly the plan. And then at the last minute yesterday, they moved it up, and he's now going to be the last speaker in, this is President Xi, of course, the last speaker in the morning session, making a video contribution, a virtual contribution from China. But of course, President Xi will be talking as the UN Secretary General, who himself gave a very, very forceful speech today. In fact, let me just read you the opening line of Secretary General Antonio Guterres' speech. He said, "I'm here to sound an alarm. The world must wake up. We're on the edge of an abyss." And it went on like that. It was extraordinary. But one of the things he's doing is bashing Washington and Beijing heads together and saying, you must work together. You've got to, you can't row like this. You've got to get it together. And so President Xi, I think, is likely to talk about his vision for the world under multilateralism and centrality here at the United Nations. Multilateralism the world over, respect for sovereignty, and the United Nations Charter, in other words. I think this is the 50th anniversary, isn't it, of the PRC, the People's Republic of China, coming to the United Nations and the Security Council. They've played a huge role here. You see them all the time here, whereas the United States has kind of rode back a little bit since 9/11 and in the last couple of years. And I think he might also touch on the AUKUS outrage that China feels over that Australia deal, and of course Afghanistan as well, at a time when Afghanistan is now reshaping its future. And there are just two major embassies left in Kabul, major nations, the Russians and China. Guys, back to you.
John Terrett, thanks very much.
Well, let's talk to Winnie King now, Senior Lecturer in Politics and International Studies at the University of Bristol. Winnie, America is back was Joe Biden's slogan for this address. Is America really back, do you think? Did this speech signal America's return to the international stage?
In all honesty, I don't think America's ever been not on the international stage. It's under Trump, he basically just had a different agenda in terms of how things would be applied. Biden is trying to take an approach which combines the more traditional line that he had with Obama, as well as under what we see under Trump. Above all, though, what we're seeing is that America comes first.
Biden's tone was America is going to work with its partners and its allies to build a better world. He pledged cooperation with allies through what he called a decisive decade for our world. I wonder, how is this going to be received by some allies? I'm thinking particularly of the French, who might be feeling pretty bruised at the moment from that AUKUS deal.
I think the key thing we need to understand is that under Biden's presidency, there's been a lot of inconsistency. So when he came onto the stage, when he was anointed as the president for the United States, the first thing we saw was the G7 and the NATO meetings in June. And what it was calling for was collaboration and cooperation, really big, grand plans, part of the Build Back Better World kind of motto that he talked about today. But those were very short-lived. So the extent to which we can actually see this approach that Biden's talking about, a decisive new decade for our world, and how he will work with partners and allies in rebuilding these relationships, is really to be questioned, particularly given the AUKUS deal.
He also talked about the US withdrawal from Afghanistan. I wonder, do you think he managed to move beyond that rather chaotic US exit from Afghanistan with this speech? Has this speech put clear blue water between those times?
Not at all. While he does declare that military will be the last resort, he has not distanced himself significantly from the kind of dominant hard power kind of line that he has taken. If we look at what he said about North Korea, if we look at what he said about Iran, and most significantly when he talks about cyber and technology, really America's interest is combining what would be hard power and soft power as a means of developing new international standards, which America will lead in its efforts to maintain its position at the head of the table for the international system.
And he talked about global trade. He talked about pursuing new rules of global trade and economic growth. What did he mean by that?
Well, new rules would ultimately mean the current system as we have it is how China, what is basically considered America's main kind of challenger on the international stage, has grown economically, grown politically, grown diplomatically. So new rules need to be established in order for America to reassert its position. But throughout Biden's speech, he raised points and challenged the lines about basically how certain players on the international stage didn't follow trade rules, trade regulations, issues of international intellectual property rights, etc. And so we know with that, he's directly commenting on China's position and China's behavior. So these new rules will automatically be new rules set again by America, led by America. And as long as the trade works according to America's priorities, this is basically what we're talking about in terms of a potential new trade regime.
Winnie King at the University of Bristol, thank you very much.
Thank you.
France's Defence Secretary has accused Australia of treason as the row over AUKUS, the new Australia, US and UK defence pact, continues to rumble on.
France had agreed a multi-billion-dollar deal to build those submarines for Australia, but the agreement was cancelled last week in favour of US nuclear vessels.
France says there's now a lack of trust between the traditional allies and is urging the EU to consider delaying a trade deal in retaliation. Well, our correspondent Ross Cullen is in Paris. So, Ross, strong words from the French Defence Secretary.
Yes, some really tough talk from Florence Parly. She was speaking this afternoon in Parliament, addressing MPs with an urgent statement and also underscoring what we have heard previously from the French Foreign Secretary, that as far as the French government is concerned, Australia betrayed France. But Florence Parly was also speaking about the wider geopolitical issues. She said that France is an Indo-Pacific nation with nearly 2 million citizens in the Indian and Pacific Oceans, from Mayotte between Mozambique and Madagascar, Réunion next to Mauritius. And if you go east from Australia, the first country you come to is France, with the overseas territory of New Caledonia, Polynesia as well. She was saying that 90% of France's exclusive economic zone is located in that part of the world, so it's undeniable that France will be wanting to play a part in wider Indo-Pacific strategy. She also mentioned China and said that China is a growing power in the region. There is growing aggression from China in the region, and she said that that is a source of great difficulty, and France wants to play its part in offering an alternative to that growing aggression from China.
And Ross, perhaps not unexpectedly, the EU has backed France in this row.
Yes, Robin, Florence Parly was also mentioning this wider search for European support. She said that we need to agree on a shared European response. There needs to be a shared European driving line when it comes to the direction that France and Europe want to take in responding to this diplomatic crisis. That is something that France has been crying out for: more vocal backing, more obvious support from EU allies for its position in this diplomatic discord. And we did hear earlier today from Michael Roth the German Europe minister, and he was outlining his and Europe's support for France, but also another question as well, bringing back into light the idea that there needs to be further discussions, perhaps at European Union level, but on a future collaboration when it comes to defence and security. This is something that came up again for discussion during the chaotic withdrawal of civilians and troops from Afghanistan in August, and something else that Michael Roth thinks it's come back up for discussion now that there is this new diplomatic crisis between the United States and France. But Robin, let's listen in now to a little bit more of what Michael Roth had to say.
Of course, I understand the disappointment of our French partners, and we're in close contact here. It is once again a wake-up call for all of us in the European Union to ask how can we strengthen our sovereignty.
So what implications could this dispute have on the potential trade agreements between the EU and Australia?
Yes, this is something else that is going on in the background, and as far as Australia sees, no implications. Dan Tehan is the trade minister. He's expected in France early next month. He's expected at the trade talks, which are meant to be continuing with their next round in the middle of October, and he says that the two issues are separate. It is in the EU's interests, it is in Australia's interests to agree a free trade accord. But as far as France sees it, France is actively trying to link the two issues. They are not separate, it says, because there is such a deep diplomatic discord at the moment between the two sides that is obviously going to be impacting other areas of EU policy, like trying to agree a free trade accord, and France calling on EU trade ministers to at least voice their concerns and perhaps even suggest a delay to the talks, such is the deep dissatisfaction with the situation at the moment. Robin?
Ross, thank you. Ross Cullen there in Paris.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, keep the home fires burning, but UK gas supplies are running low as prices rise. What does it all mean for customers this winter?
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to the Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
I'm Ryan Thompson in Frankfurt. With elections on the horizon, Europe's largest economy is preparing for a shakeup.
I'm Natalie Carney in Munich, and I'll be asking voters how immigration and the handling of the COVID-19 pandemic will affect their decisions when they head to the polls.
And I'm Trent Murray in Berlin, as Germany prepares to elect a new government and usher in a new post-Merkel era.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Just a reminder for you that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion at cgtn.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Customers across the UK are bracing themselves for a hike in energy prices. The British government says it's hopeful steps can be taken to ease the supply shortage caused by a spike in global gas prices.
But there's been no final word yet on a deal. Guy Henderson reports on the ongoing risks to business up and down the country.
It's been a torrid 18 months for this British pig farmer. First it was Brexit and pandemic-induced labour shortages and trade disruptions. Now a spike in gas prices that means her pigs may never make it to market.
We're facing a really dark day on UK farms, because if we get to a point that we have to euthanize pigs on farm simply because they can't then get butchered, that will be devastating.
Kate is just one of countless examples of companies struggling to cope with the domino effect of this crisis. In her case, it's down to fertiliser manufacturers halting operations. That'll impact farmers, but also things like abattoirs, meat packing factories, even steel mills, which rely on one of their byproducts, carbon dioxide.
Oh hey, have you heard of Bulb?
The most obvious impact, though, is on energy firms themselves. Bulb, which supplies 1.7 million customers, is the latest to admit it's looking for new financing as it struggles to afford to buy wholesale gas. A legal cap on prices in the UK means it can't pass that on to consumers right now. Dozens of smaller providers lack the capacity to just suck up those extra costs, which has led to whispers of winter power shortages that Britain's business minister sought to silence in Parliament on Monday.
There is absolutely no question, Mr. Speaker, of the lights going out or people being unable to heat their homes.
On Tuesday morning, he continued to outline details as to how that might be avoided.
Well, I don't think it's the right thing for government taxpayer money to be injected into companies that have been badly run. And as I've said, over the last 3 or 4 years, every winter we have suppliers which exit the market, which fail for various reasons. And we don't bail those out. We simply transfer their customers onto other companies.
Analysts say this difficult moment exposes longer-term vulnerabilities.
Historically, first of all, with gas generated from coal, and then with North Sea gas, we've had it good for a long time. And we've never had really to be concerned about energy security. Things are changing.
Keeping the gas price running this winter will likely mean yet more emergency government spending, just as ministers are trying to tighten the country's pandemic-battered purse strings. Guy Henderson, CGTN, London.
Theft in broad daylight. That's how Poland has described a daily fine of more than $500,000 imposed by Europe's top court. The penalty was imposed when it refused to close a coal mine near the border with the Czech Republic, which claims the mine is harming local communities. Warsaw says it won't pay. Our correspondent Penelope Leertz joins us now from Budapest. Penny, this dispute has been going on for some time. Tell us more.
Well, Jamie, this mine itself has been open near the borders of Germany and the Czech Republic in Poland for more than a century, but recently made plans to try and expand further towards the Czech territory. Now, the Czech Republic raised concerns with the European Union quite some time ago, specifically about groundwater on their side, environmental impacts and impacts on their community if this mine is to expand. So it's been going on for quite a few months. We saw back in May, towards the end of the month, the European Court of Justice laying down an interim measure saying that Poland needed to cease operations at the mine while they came to a final decision in this particular issue. There was then bilateral discussions started between Warsaw and Prague, but we then saw Poland not complying with that ruling and not stopping operations at the mine, which is when the Czech authorities then asked the European Commission and the court to step in and charge Poland potentially €5 million, more than $5 million a day as daily penalties if they continue to operate the mine. So Monday's decision not quite that heavy-handed. It's €500,000 and just over $500,000 that Poland is facing in daily penalties for keeping this operation running, but it has still been welcomed by the Czech authorities.
Poland still doesn't sound like it's going to comply, so what happens next?
Poland certainly standing very strong on this issue. The Prime Minister today saying they'll be using all legal and other possibilities to try and fight this decision, as you said earlier, refusing to pay a cent of the fines or cease operations at the mine itself. We've had European Commission spokespeople coming out today confirming that it is Poland's legal obligation to pay these fines as well as comply with that ruling to stop the operations, saying that the European Commission and European Union will use all their powers possible to try and force Poland to comply with these fines and this particular ruling. But it is the latest in a long line of run-ins and fights between Warsaw and Brussels. There's a number of other European Court of Justice decisions that Poland is currently pushing back against and yet to comply with. So we'll have to see which powers are instated next to try and force Poland to come to the party on this particular decision.
I don't know if you could hear it, but we've just been reporting on the UK's struggle with its gas supply. So I guess Poland's determination to hold on to its coal-fired power stations might just have some fans here in Britain.
Well, no doubt there would be some people in Poland and in Britain thinking it's very important that Poland hold on to running this particular mine, this coal deposit, as well as the power plant nearby. Poland says this particular mine supplies around 7% of the country's entire energy output. It's also seen as a major employer in the region, so the Polish government has many reasons to try and hold on to their operations there. Also, back in 2020, the then climate minister signed off on extending the mine's licence till at least 2026. So the Polish government likely to fight very hard to hold on to these operations and not cease them, even to continue the bilateral discussions, which they say are being hindered now by these fines handed down by the European Commission, but certainly very keen to hold on to those supplies and ensure that they can keep their energy supply as high as possible, as losing 7% would no doubt have some pretty serious ramifications for them. Jamie?
Penelope Lierch in Budapest, thank you very much.
Stock markets have stabilised on hopes that the problems at the Chinese property developer Evergrande may be contained. All the major European markets closed higher after Monday saw Wall Street experience its biggest one-day falls since May. Investors have been pulling out of property stocks amid fears of a ripple effect from a possible debt default at Evergrande.
Airlines have seen a huge surge in bookings for transatlantic flights after the United States relaxed pandemic travel restrictions. After the announcement that fully vaccinated foreigners can visit America from early November, Virgin Atlantic reported a 91% increase in bookings in 1 hour. British Airways says searches for flights to the United States soared by 700%.
JP Morgan has launched its new digital-only bank, Chase, in the UK. It'll be the US company's first overseas retail bank in its 222-year history, and the lender hopes it'll be part of a global expansion. Chase will initially offer current accounts, but is expected to move into savings, lending and mortgages.
One of London's biggest taxi firms has promised to go all-electric from 2023. Addison Lee says it'll invest around $220 million to transform its 4,000-strong fleet, adding around 200 new vehicles per month from November. Rival company Uber has pledged to be fully electric by 2025.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Germany decides. Is the economy top of the agenda for this year's election campaigns?
The EU's digital COVID certificate, which offers the promise of unlocking hassle-free travel around Europe this summer.
In less than 2 weeks' time, the Czech border will also open to all EU and Serbian citizens. 4.4 million Hungarians received their first dose of COVID vaccine.
18 and over can receive a COVID-19 vaccination, but it does come with conditions.
Third wave will probably take longer to emerge. This vaccination centre is part of a massive effort to try and drive down the numbers of the new variant that was first identified in India.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we try to save the world.
Oh, no.
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. The United States is not seeking a new Cold War. Joe Biden addresses the United Nations General Assembly in his first speech as president.
France accuses Australia of treason as the row over Canberra's defence pact with the United States and Britain shows no signs of dying down.
And thousands of people flee as lava demolishes homes in the Spanish Canary Islands.
Justin Trudeau will serve a third term as Canadian Prime Minister, but with a coalition government once again after his Liberal Party failed to reach an outright majority in Monday's ballot. Critics have called the snap election a costly gamble that didn't pay off. Well, our correspondent Nick Harper is in Toronto. So, Nick, Trudeau's been re-elected, but it is a bittersweet result for him.
Well, that's right, Robin. He certainly didn't get what he wanted. He was hoping for so much more. Let me just run you through the numbers as they stand at the moment. The votes are still being counted. But as it stands, it looks like the Liberals will get 158 seats in the House of Commons. They needed 170 to get the majority. The Democrats will have the Conservatives will have 119 in total. So at the end of the day, at the end of this 5-week snap election, the Liberals have only gained one extra seat on what they had before Justin Trudeau decided to go ahead with the election. So he certainly hasn't done what he planned to do, turning his minority government into a majority government. And it's also cost a lot of money, somewhere in the region of $500 million, which is why the Conservative leader, Erin O'Toole, has been very critical of Justin Trudeau, essentially suggesting this was a big waste of time and money. Many Canadians also angered that the Prime Minister decided to go ahead and hold an election during the pandemic, and that is perhaps part of the reason why we saw his popularity fall during the 5 weeks, not managing to achieve, therefore, what he set out to do.
So Justin Trudeau will need to form a coalition then. How easy will that be?
Well, it will be difficult. He's in the same position that he has been for the last couple of years since the 2019 election. He's had a minority government, and every time he wants to get legislation passed, he has to do deals with rival parties. But it makes it a little bit harder this time around because the party he would normally go to, the New Democratic Party, managed to strengthen their hand. They gained an extra seat. So the likelihood is that they will try and drive a harder bargain in any negotiations going forward with the Liberal Party.
So as you say, results not yet final, but will this also be a disappointment for the Conservatives?
Well, undoubtedly, Robin. I mean, the Conservatives were hoping to be able to beat the Liberals, to once again be able to be in power here in the country. But perhaps you could see this in terms of being a loss for the Conservative Party, but something of a personal win for their leader, Erin O'Toole, who was a relatively unknown candidate just a few weeks ago. 40% of Canadians 5 weeks back said that they had no idea who he was. They didn't have enough information on him to be able to form an opinion. He's only been the leader of the Conservatives for a year. So he will probably be pleased that he's been able to do what he's been able to do, hold a very tight election. He says he has no plans to resign, that he continues to challenge the Liberal government. So yes, definitely a loss, a disappointment for the Conservatives, but he has done well in terms of what he's managed to achieve over the last 5 weeks in gaining that recognition for himself.
Nick Harper in Toronto, many thanks.
Germany is going to the polls in 5 days, and the economy is likely to be a dominant election issue. The country has always prided itself on its reputation for balancing the books, but the pandemic has changed its attitude to debt.
For 2 consecutive years, its so-called debt brake has been suspended, enabling hundreds of billions of dollars to be spent.
Angela Merkel's party, the Christian Democrats, are calling for its reinstatement. Others say economic growth is better off without it. Well, our correspondent Ryan Thompson is in Frankfurt. Ryan, just how much of a role is the economy playing in this election?
Hi there, Demi. Well, a major role, but not exactly for the best reasons. Since the pandemic arrived at Europe's doorstep, Germany has been on a bit of a spending spree. This, of course, ending 6 consecutive years of budget surpluses and really marking the biggest borrowing binge since German reunification in 1990. But if you look at the state of play right now, business is back, tax revenues are here, but the recovery is not over. There is still a long way to go. Germany is also facing lots of funding questions for a green revolution and figuring out how to pay for that. And we're also talking to voters who seem increasingly less worried about the economy and more focused on climate change. So given all of these factors, economists and big business are looking at the big picture, trying to figure out whether they should expect a return to straight fiscal policy or big investments ahead.
A balanced budget is a sacred principle in German politics. Spend only what you have and avoid new debt as much as possible.
Regeln müssen eingehalten werden.
The rules must be respected. They must be checked. Their failure must be acted upon.
Konsequenzen haben.
But the COVID-19 pandemic has forced Angela Merkel's government to break away from this tradition and instead spend.
We are obliged to ask the Parliament to authorise us to borrow an unusually large sum of money to fight the crisis.
Healthcare and business support schemes have cost the government hundreds of billions of dollars, while tax revenues have taken a sharp dive during many months of lockdown. Germany has had no other choice but to suspend its so-called debt brake to pay for it all. It's one of the strictest austerity policies in all of Europe and limits budgets to take on no more new debt than what's equivalent to 0.35% of the GDP.
This debt brake, the black zero, as it's called in German, has become a trademark of the Christian Democrats. It is appealing to citizens because it means, hey, we have to be really, reliable, we have to be very creditworthy and to really deal in a very responsible way with public finances.
Europe's largest economy has once again found its heartbeat. Most businesses say they are back on track, and next year's federal budget is likely to include far less of a shortfall. It's not yet clear if the debt brake will be reenacted as is constitutionally required, but many candidates eyeing the Chancellery say the pandemic has proven it should be done away with.
We need to change the debt brake in a way that we incentivize more that the government really makes investments. Germany was performing very well after the financial crisis, but it wasted this opportunity to actually change things, to do some reforms and to invest into the future. The pandemic just accelerated a lot of things and made things worse. So there's an even bigger need now, but the need was there before.
The public appetite to revise the rules is changing, according to recent polling. Left-leaning parties like the Greens want to reform the policy to foster major green investments. But the Christian Democrats and Social Democrats are unlikely to waver on their commitment to a strictly balanced budget. SPD frontman Olaf Scholz has been Merkel's finance minister since 2018.
All German parties, they all have big investment programs in their manifestos. but the financing of these manifestos differs.
Any constitutional change would require 2/3 majority support in Parliament, something unlikely to happen in the current political climate.
Now, we're only a few months away from the presentation of the 2022 budget, at least in the short term. A lot of economists expect them to once again hold off on the debt brake, keep that suspended, because there will be a need for some of these additional funds. Many economists also expect some of these coalition talks to form a new government to take a little bit longer than usual, and it's likely that Angela Merkel will at least be the one in charge as they begin the next budget debate process. But Jamie, we will just have to see.
Ryan Thompson in Frankfurt, thank you very much.
A revival in global trade will be crucial to Germany's post-pandemic economic recovery. And the new government's relations with Germany's biggest trading partner, China, could have a big impact there.
Jörg Wuttke is the president of the EU Chamber of Commerce in China. I asked him what kind of relationship we could expect after this election.
Well, I mean, it's going to be more complex for sure, because we had the privilege of having a chancellor for 16 years who was very much well-versed about China. We had a chancellor who came here every year. And now all of a sudden we have a new coalition, 3 parties, 2 of them are very China critical. So best case, status quo. Otherwise, I think it's going to be more complex, and Beijing has to adjust accordingly.
How significant is the business relationship between Germany and China?
Well, Germany is 50% of all exports from Europe into China. That's, of course, massive. We are a huge investor. German business employs 1 million people here. And China equally is very important to us. I mean, there has been many takeovers, in particular in the Mittelstand in the southern part of Germany. So we have a lot of common ground that we should develop on. Of course, we ask for more development here, opening up of the marketplace. If that's not going to happen, then I guess we run a bit of a risk that Germany might think about reciprocity and closing the European market down. And Germany determines in many ways what's happening in Europe. So it's very important that we have a government which is well rooted in Europe, at the same time open for changes with China.
What do you think German business wants from China?
We want not to be politicized. We want to be left alone, making business, paying taxes, employing people, getting our products around. And cases like, this H&M Adidas summer, where there was such backlash against these companies pulling out of the sourcing scene in Xinjiang, is really not good. It teaches the wrong lesson. So I hope that we can depoliticize the atmosphere and not always use companies in order to achieve political goals. It is very, very complicated, I know, but we are worried, and our service all indicated politicization of business is not a good idea.
And what do you think China wants from Germany?
I think they want Germany to have a strong influence on Europe in order to stay open, not get protectionist. I think they would like to have Germany also toning down these value discussions, human rights and so forth, which really annoy the leadership over here. But I'm afraid that's impossible. There will be even more value discussions in Germany. So I think there might be too much expectations on how much Germany can actually swing the needle with a new administration. It will be more of a team player than it used to be. There will be more say among the Spaniards, the Poles and the Italians, in particular also as the French go to the polls, and nobody knows if Macron is still going to be president next May.
So just days now before Germany votes, bringing an end to Angela Merkel's 16 years as Chancellor. But her party, the Christian Democratic Union, owed a great debt for its time in government to the support of one much smaller state party. Natalie Carney reports from Munich.
Since the end of World War II, German politics have been somewhat complicated, and Bavaria's Christian Social Union, or CSU, exemplifies that. Initially a part of Bavaria's conservative and Catholic rural population, the state's economic success has led to a broadening of its support base, allowing the CSU to capture an absolute majority in the state for decades. That strength is what led the Federal Christian Democratic Union, or CDU, to seek its backing. Bavaria is home to 13 million people, so CSU supporters regularly make up 7 to 10% of votes in federal elections.
The CSU is only active in Bavaria. They do not run in entire Germany and in federal elections, but the CSU is so strong in Bavaria that it's the third biggest or largest party in Germany. So the CDU would not be as strong as it is without the CSU.
The policies of the CSU generally run in parallel to those of the CDU's, yet there are times that they rival them. A 2018 clash over Angela Merkel's refugee policy threatened to break the union between the two parties, which could have led to a collapse of the entire government. In past years, 2 CSU candidates have been put forward for the chancellorship in national elections, but neither were elected by parliament members. This year, CSU leader Markus Söder lost out to CDU party member Armin Laschet.
However, as election day approaches, the CDU-CSU's campaign is faltering, and some would argue that has to do with their chosen candidate for chancellor. Armin Laschet has had a number of campaign follies, while opinion polls show the CSU's Markus Söder much more popular with the general public.
Söder has criticized Laschet's alleged lack of dynamism, but has also offered him his full backing. Other CSU members, however, have not been so supportive. Regardless, many believe the long-standing alliance will endure.
Both parties know that they need the other one. Without the CDU, the CSU would just be a Bavarian party. And without the CSU, the CDU could not govern. So in politics, it's not about a faction, it's just about the will to power, and both parties have the will to power, and therefore their so-called joint group in parliament will not be put into question.
While a unique setup for any European parliament, it's one that's worked for Germany, but does add to the country's complex political system. Natalie Carney, CGTN, Munich.
An investigation is underway after the personal details of interpreters working for the UK Armed Forces in Afghanistan were leaked by the British government. The Ministry of Defence has apologised after the email addresses of 250 Afghans seeking to relocate to the UK were copied into an official email so all recipients could see them. Some had names and photo IDs attached.
Poland is sending 500 extra troops to its border with Belarus after the bodies of 4 migrants were found. Warsaw claims that a deliberate campaign by Belarus has seen tens of thousands of migrants massing on its border. 3 Iraqi men and a woman who were thought to have died from hypothermia were discovered on Sunday. A further 7 migrants were found needing hospital treatment.
The UK has charged a 3rd Russian intelligence officer over the 2018 poisoning of a former Russian spy in the English city of Salisbury. The police say Denis Sergeyev is wanted for attempted murder after the Novichok attack on Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia. Officers say they believe a team of 3 assassins linked to Russia's foreign spy agency were responsible for the attack.
The European Court of Human Rights has ruled that Russia was responsible for the 2006 killing of a former KGB officer in the UK. Alexander Litvinenko was poisoned by the radioactive agent polonium-210 whilst having tea at a London hotel. The ruling from Europe's highest court echoes the findings of a British public inquiry in 2016. Moscow says the court has neither the authority or capacity to rule on the case.
Sudan has accused forces loyal to ousted President Omar al-Bashir of attempting to stage a coup. In a televised statement, the Sudanese Prime Minister said the plot had been foiled and a number of those behind it had been arrested. Nabat Mohideen is in Khartoum.
It's not yet known who exactly was behind the attempted coup, but the Sudanese Prime Minister said the plot was linked to the former government of the ousted leader Omar al-Bashir.
You saw the failed attempt this morning that was targeting to undermine the gains and the civilian democratic transition and block the road in front of the historical change. But people's will was stronger, and apostasy is impossible.
The streets of Khartoum look normal amid reports a group of officers tried to take over state media building. According to the power-sharing agreement, the military should have handed over the power to a civilian government last May, but that the transitional government should rule Sudan until elections in 2022. The cabinet has stopped the blotters and said 40 officers and civilians participated in the incident. Sudan has been battling economic hardship under the transitional government, which has been a source of strain on the authorities. Naba Muhiddin, CGTN, Khartoum, Sudan.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, thousands of people flee their homes in Spain's Canary Islands as boiling lava from an erupting volcano approaches the sea.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you. All around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Further evacuations have been taking place on the Spanish island of La Palma as a volcanic eruption continues.
It's the first volcanic activity in half a century and has already caused huge disruption. The Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, has flown in to see the emergency response. Rahul Pathak reports.
It's virtually an impossible task for the emergency services. Now in its third day, and with temperatures reaching up to 1,000 degrees Celsius, the lava flow has engulfed everything in its path, destroying around 120 houses and forcing more than 5,000 people to evacuate. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez flew in from Madrid to assess the situation and meet with the emergency services for a briefing. His government has drafted in the army and military emergency units to provide essential ground support in the effort to reduce the impact of the eruption. He also sought to reassure the local community.
I would like to convey our total commitment, our unequivocal support that this eruption will not leave anyone in the worse off. We will ensure that no one will be affected from an economic point of view, regardless of the fact that there has been irreparable damage to belongings that we will not be able to replace, such as the loss of homes.
Now, as of this moment, travel and communication between the mainland and the island remains unaffected. However, there were reports of another eruption zone appearing late on Monday night, so the situation remains under constant review.
The latest concern for the emergency services is when the lava flow reaches the sea. The molten lava and cool saltwater mix can produce toxic gases which contain chlorine and can potentially cause explosions. Exclusion zones have been set up along the coast to prevent anyone getting close. It's been a traumatic experience for the islanders.
Your whole life goes like this. The volcano decides to erupt, and your whole life is practically over.
We know when it started, but we don't know how long it will take. And it's not so much when it will stop, but when it will cool down.
Scientists do believe that the lava flow is slowing and earthquake activity has decreased.
But they have also warned that new fissures could still open. Thankfully, no lives have been lost, but Mother Nature has certainly left her mark. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
Millions of people in China are celebrating the Mid-Autumn Festival, the second most important date in the Chinese lunar calendar after the New Year. The festival is held on the 15th day of the 8th month to celebrate the autumn harvest. People are marking the day with mooncakes and lanterns. In Hunan province, people are celebrating by fishing. And in the southwest, the town of Bajong in Sichuan province is decorated with beautifully crafted lanterns. People hope the lanterns will bring happiness and reunite families.
Well, mooncakes are always on the menu during the festival. They're typically made from pastry with a sweet filling such as bean, lotus seed or red date paste. Traditional flavours like mixed nuts have been overtaken in popularity by new flavours such as lava egg custard and fruit mooncakes. Sales revenues from the sweet treats are expected to reach $3.4 billion.
Mooncakes flavoured with Thailand's famously smelly fruit durian are one of the highlights as Thais celebrate Mid-Autumn Festival. From Bangkok, Martin Lowe reports.
Chinatown, Bangkok, one of the largest Chinese communities outside China. Not even a global pandemic can stop the celebrations. For Mid-Autumn Festival, the streets become a blaze of colour. Food is an important part, especially locally made mooncakes. This year, cakes flavoured with Thai durian are especially popular.
Durian flavour is our best seller because we use real fruit. Because of COVID, we've had fewer customers in the shop, but we've sold more online.
There are a lot of flavors these days, such as lotus seed, taro, durian, and cream. The new generation will like cream, but durian is still the most popular in my opinion.
The party will be a little muted this year due to COVID-19. Bangkok has a 9 p.m. curfew, calling an early halt to festivities that would otherwise last well into the night.
I see less people celebrating this year. That's the main difference. It is less busy and crowded because of the COVID-19 infection.
And though this one is open, a number of Chinese temples which would normally be a focus for events are closed due to the pandemic. But the festival remains one of the key dates on the calendar. For many Thais of Chinese descent, it's second only to Chinese New Year. Martin Lowe, CGTN, Bangkok.
A new attraction has opened in Helsinki, offering Finns fed up with lockdowns a chance to vent their frustrations. The so-called Rage Room allows visitors to smash up old electrical goods, vacuum cleaners and unwanted crockery. The manager says it's been a particular hit with women. He's also installed a divorce rage room, complete with wedding dress for those trying to get over a failed relationship. Much more at europe.cgtn.com.
The headlines again. The United States is not seeking a new Cold War. Joe Biden addresses the United Nations General Assembly in his first speech as president.
France accuses Australia of treason as the row over Canberra's defence agreement with the United States and Britain shows no signs of dying down.
And the coal war. Poland says it will keep mining despite being fined $500,000 a day by the EU.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, cgtn.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.